time out today to come to the second Jazzy Day workshop. These are a total of 6 workshops to spread out the information. Also, there's so much jazz to learn that there's no way that we could learn it in one day. It actually took me 4 years, 16-hour days to learn what I know, and I'm still learning. Today I wanted to give a little history lesson on more blues and swing music. And after that, I will open it up for questions, and I will do my best to answer them. And then there will be a 10 to 15 minute break where you can grab some more water or use the bathroom, which is right through this door, stage right, your left, and down the hall there's a women's and men's bathroom. Now, is there any musicians in here other than I and Sir Doug? Yes. What instrument do you play?
Assorted, but the one I'm mainly learning right now is piano.
Awesome. Yes. Sorry. There's always something in live events. Like with jazz, it never starts on time because either a musician isn't there or prepared or their instrument isn't tuned. So there's always something. And we will be bringing in a piano shortly if you would like to stay afterwards to play a little. And you are more than welcome to hang out while we do that. I personally play the trumpet and assortment as well. The trumpet, the tenor sax, the alto sax, the baritone, and the clarinet. I currently only own a trumpet and a baritone saxophone and a clarinet. The clarinet is actually an instrument that jazz players use as a secondary instrument for saxophone players. The saxophone players kind of pick up that string concert feeling, so that way jazz can do it with 3 people and give you a full symphony band. That clarinet kind of picks up that. So I wanted to recap. I do have some notes just to keep me in order. There's so much information, my brain would jump all over the place if I didn't have this. I wanted to recap on the very first one on April 5th. We talked about the blues being the foundation of jazz. It was originated by slaves when they were brought over by the enslavers. They sang music, they played music to kind of escape from their troubles. So as we would see jazz being sad and all over the place, the musicians escape with jazz. They go to another land with their music and they create, and they just have a space where they can be themselves away from the sadness. That's actually where call and response originated was from the slaves. They would call out in the fields when the enslaver was coming to get them or something. They would call out to the rest of the workers to make sure that they were okay, like give them a warning. And then the other workers would respond that they heard the warning and everyone's safe. We also talked about ragtime, New Orleans jazz. So this is basically the French and the European clashed, like mixed in with the African rhythms that the blues offered in with the slaves. And it kind of created like the African style music and church music combined, and you get ragtime, New Orleans jazz. Now, this is the sound of like piano. I know Scott Joplin, if anybody's ever heard of him, he does a lot of fast piano. It's gonna be like syncopated music that gets people going and dancing and having a lot of fun. The New Orleans Orleans jazz was the style of a lot of marching bands in New Orleans. So what you see today with like funerals and weddings on the streets of New Orleans, that's what they gave back in the 1900s. They wouldn't even write down their music. All they did was memorize and rehearse, but it was all improvised. The rehearsal gave them structure, and then they were free to just play what they wanted to play. So I think after catching up for the blues and New Orleans jazz, I wanted to talk about more blues. And a lot of times in jazz, you study the foundations and the roots and the music theory, but studying jazz is studying the musician that played jazz. So we talked about the music styles, and today I want to talk about two huge blues musicians that kind of paved the way for more blues musicians. And that is Robert Johnson, a guitar player, and Billie Holiday, a singer, a jazz vocalist. Those two, I would have to say in my studies, that they really laid down foundations for what was expected out of jazz musicians. Robert Johnson influenced people like B.B. King, and influenced rock and roll players. Billie Holiday influences a lot of vocalists, and even just the listener. Has anybody ever listened to Billie Holiday before this? She's got a soulful voice. She is quite magnificent in her vocals, and today I'm going to tell you why she's so magnificent. But starting off in 1911, Robert Johnson was born, and he actually started the Crossroad story. Has anybody ever heard of that before this? Excellent. So, there was this rumor going around during that time that Robert Johnson sold his soul for the skill to play the guitar. And this was done at the Crossroads. However, I wanted to tell you the whole story. So one night at a Mississippi juke joint in 1930, musicians Son House and Willie Brown played their infamous Delta blues tunes to a packed house. During the intermission, a young, bright-eyed 19-year-old Robert Johnson said, I could play that, and he went up on stage and grabbed the guitar, and he wanted to show the crowd what he had. But to his surprise, the crowd didn't like it. Even Son House admitted that his guitar playing was severely below par, and he was a better harmonica player, if that. Following these events, Robert Johnson disappeared for approximately 3 years before he ended up on stage again. But after those 3 years, he mastered the blues. This came as a surprise to those who knew him before his disappearance, but folks began to discredit his talents with stories and myths, and this is where the Crossroads comes in. So on Highway 49 and 61, where they meet, it is said that Robert Johnson went there. He went there and sold his soul to get the skills to play the blues masterfully. And songs that he plays, such as Hellhound on My Trail, Crossroad Blues, Up Jumped the Devil, Me and the Devil Blues, kind of hones in on the story, right? He really did not let anybody think otherwise on that. And although he is credited to be the first musician to bargain with the devil, it began actually with Tommy Johnson no relation to Robert. And a relative of Tommy's actually recalls the stories as such, and I quote, "You go to where a road crosses, that way and that way, where a crossroad is. Get there, be sure to get there just a little before 12 that night, so you'll know you'll be there. You have your guitar and be playing a piece there by yourself. A big black man will walk up there and take your guitar and he'll tune it. And then he'll play a piece and hand it back to you. That's the way I learned to play anything I want," said the relative about Tommy. The only difference between Robert Johnson's story and Tommy Johnson's is the age that they died. So Tommy lived well into his 60s. However, Robert died at 27. Does anybody else know any other musician that may have died at 27? Really testing your knowledge. I'll give you one. Kurt Cobain from Nirvana. This really, after, what is it? Almost 100 years at that point, you get two people into the 27 club. And there was more. Can't think of them on the top of my head, and I wish I wrote them down. But there was more. And it became a 27 club of, jazz music is the devil's music, rock and roll is the devil's music. Basically any genre that those 27 club members have sang or dealt with became the devil's music. But as we know today, that we can appreciate music for what it is and how much time and skill it takes to play such things. And a lot of people took that myth and ran with it to decrease the value in jazz. A lot of racism took place, so they really honed in on it. I wanted to say, though, that the concept of making deals can be traced back all the way to the 15th century. So this is nothing new. This is, again, just people trying to decrease the value of jazz music. A lot of family members of Robert Johnson have come forward to dispel this. They informed us that during the time he was missing, where he ran into musician Zimmerman, and Zimmerman took Johnson under his wing, and for 3 years, Johnson practiced the blues. And that's really all it takes to master anything. Practice. Practice, practice, practice. And honestly, any musician can tell you it's going to be the most annoying part of the music part. But it's so worth it once you get into that environment and you start performing what you've learned. There was another rumor that a lot of musicians at the time would go to graveyards and sit on a grave and ask the spirits to help them with their skills. But what this turned into was just them practicing for 12 hours at night, asking the spirits to help them, and they didn't realize that their practice meant they were getting better. They gave all their credit to the spirits. So that's Robert Johnson. There's not much about him after that. He was a great blues player. If you can, check out his guitar playing. I wanted to move on to the second blues performer, Billie Holiday. She has a lot more information, but she lived into her 50s. So on April 7th, 1915, Billie Holiday was born. She was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and for the past 80-something years, Billie's legacy continues to embody what is elegant and cool in contemporary music. She was a cultural icon, musical masterpieces, songwriting skills, creativity, and courageous views on equality and justice. Did anyone know that Billie Holiday is not her real name? She was born Eleonora Fagan Go. In her early teens, she spent singing along with records of Bessie Smith and Louis Armstrong. It's kind of hard to think that she later performs with these greats. It's like the equivalent today of pop music on the radio, and your kids growing up and performing with those, with REO Speedwagon. So in 1929, her mother moved to New York in search for better jobs, reasonably so. Young Eleonora soon joined her there and began showing up at jazz clubs to audition and sing with resident pianists. Resident means that they stationed at that club. They didn't go anywhere else. They were the pianists. She made debuts in obscure Harlem nightclubs. And I say obscure because these were going to be your speakeasy type clubs. The alcohol, the girls, what do they say? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's Harlem. It was around this time that she borrowed her professional name, Billie Holiday, from the screen actress Billy Dove. Holiday never had any technique training, including how to read music. So already, she's doing amazing. That ear really helps. She became a part of the most vibrant jazz scene in the country all before she was 18. As the Harlem Renaissance transitioned into the swing era, this was all happening all before she was 18. But before I get into more of the swing of it, the swing of things, she was spotted by producer John Hammond, and she recorded a group led by clarinetist Benny Goodman. Billie recorded hit after hit, and in 1938, Artie Shaw invited her to front his orchestra, making Billie the first Black woman to work with a white band. Before we dive more into swing, I wanted to mention the oppression that Billie saw and dealt with daily. I mentioned earlier that it was known she was courageous for the justice and inequalities of life. And it was because of the oppression that was going on at the time, the racism, the fact that the white man didn't want to see Black musicians. And Billie saw that and fought that daily, that hate. I can't even imagine what she went through. But think about, if someone says courageous, I think it's being courageous to public speak or to skydive. To be courageous at just performing what she loved to do in the first place, I think says a lot for that day and age. But it did take a toll on Billie Holiday's mental health. So we talked about how musicians use the music for escapism. Billie gave her soul to escape from that oppression that she was feeling. And a lot of musicians, music isn't enough to escape to, so they escape to cigarettes, alcohol, other drugs. And this just drove in the fact that this is the devil's music. This is sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Elvis became popular during this time, and they said the same thing about him. But he learned a lot of it from the Harlem clubs in New York. What was Billie's drug choice? She smoked 3 packs a day, and she died of cirrhosis. It's a severe scarring of the liver because her drug choice of cigarettes. She's a frequent drinker. She used opium, cocaine, and a lot of heroin. She was spending $500 a week on those things. Today's money, that is $9,000 a week. When you go home, I want you to not only listen to more jazz and see what is going on in the world during that time, but also listen to Strange Fruit from Billie Holiday. Her performance left the audience silent, and I believe it's because she gave her soul into that song. She wanted people to hear how terrible things were going and actually listen to the words she was saying. It's truly sad what happened to Billie Holiday's talent, but if we remember how she got there and what she did to get there, then maybe we can help someone today. We can help that musician today get help and find a better way to escape with music and something else other than drugs. That's kind of the point I wanted to bring this up today, is just to inform that they're not bad people, and it's not even a bad choice. It's just bad circumstances that led them to that choice. So as we see blues to ragtime New Orleans to jazz, we actually, at that time, when it's transitioning out, it moved to Chicago. So we got Chicago jazz to New York jazz to big band jazz. So now I'm done talking about the blues. We're gonna get into big bands and swing bands. So a big band is anywhere from today from 12 to 25 people. But it started with just 7 players. The new breed of jazz musicians are band leader Fletcher Henderson, Don Redman, and Duke Ellington. Swing music has a mix of music readers and non-readers who learned improvisation. So you kind of have the, I know what I'm talking about, I don't know what I'm talking about, and then they clash. But the fact that they all came together to produce such music that took over the world, it's the equivalent of that pop music being on the radio. It's equivalent of TikTok these days. And that's how amazing swing was. Swing music was uplifting. Can anybody tell me what was going on from 1935 to 1945? I believe I heard the World War II, yes. Thank you. And during that time, people needed to escape from the world's issues. They did that with swing music. You could dance. You can actually hear it right now. This is swing. At the clubs, you would hear it. It's uplifting, it's loving, and it's stemmed from the blues. So this made the dancing escapism. When you dance and swing, you don't need to worry about a thing. This made big band music more popular than any genre, and New York became the center of the music world. Why did New York become the center of the music world? Because that's where all the recording companies landed. That's where the publishing houses and the fields and styles happened. Benny Goodman sparked the beginning of the big band era on August 21st, 1935 at the Palomar Ballroom in Hollywood, California. Duke Ellington started his big band in Washington, D.C. Chick Webb was in Baltimore. Jimmy Lunsford was in Memphis. The Missourians, led by Wilson Robinson, was stationed out of St. Louis. Easy to remember. Missourians, Missouri. This was the band that backed for Cab Calloway and that song, Minnie the Moocher, I mentioned at the beginning. Louis Russell and Louis Armstrong and Hines were all in Chicago. Fletcher Henderson took the piano to New York. So all of these places, California, DC, Baltimore, Memphis, St. Louis, Chicago, New York, it's all over. You couldn't go outside without hearing anybody not talk about swing. There was a magazine called Downbeat. I say was. There still is. There is a magazine called Downbeat. It's actually on the table outside this room for your viewing afterwards, if you so please. And it was published out of New York. It included the whole world of jazz. This was a good way for everybody to be connected, from all the way from California to New York. There was hundreds of performance halls at this time. Ballrooms, Roseland, Savoy, the Cotton Club, Paradise Blue Room. There was also a lot of movies featuring jazz during this time, such as Hollywood Hotel, The Fabulous Dorseys, Winter Wonderland, my favorite, Swing Fever, Stage Door Canteen, and Sun Valley Serenade. Has anybody ever heard of any of those movies? Awesome, awesome. I suggest, if you haven't, to look up Winter Wonderland during Christmas. Whenever I need information, the name escapes me. Who is the lead singer in Winter Wonderland? He played the song Maka Kaliki Maka, Mela Kaliki Maka. I'll think about it. I'll think it. He's a great singer. He really did a great job on that movie. Big band swing had the dance called Lindy Hop. Now, Lindy Hop is when you would pick up your partner, swing them around, and drop them, and then continue your dance. Very dangerous. Very dangerous. I do not recommend it at all if you are not a practice dancer. This actually was created, started with George Shorty Snowden, the world's first Lindy Hopper. His partner, Matty Purnell, did a breakaway step in the dance marathon at Harlem's Rockland Palace in 1928. This led to what we know now as the Jitterbug, East Coast Swing Jive, and the Lindy Charleston. I do encourage you, outside of today's workshop, to check out the website swingstep.com. This is swingstep.com. This website goes into more detail about Lindy Hop and how it started and all of it's a website on anti-racism that they believe if we properly educate ourselves about the history of this dance, the circumstances that formed it, and the people who greatly contribute to it, risk removing it from our body of knowledge. And if we don't place appreciation and value on it, we'll contribute greatly to cultural appropriation. I thought it was a lovely website, and I agree. Can't forget about history because we learn from history. Swingstep.com. All these great stories, a great way to have fun, but does anybody know the demise of swing? So there wasn't much travel going on at this time. If you had a club, you would stay there. There was a gas shortage that had a lot to do with it, but also the 20% amusement tax. Whew. They taxed it. They taxed the songs. They taxed the food. They taxed the dancing, the clubs. It was outrageous. It was in 1944, a new wartime cabaret tax went into effect, imposing a ruinous 30%, which later turned to the destructive 20%, on all recipients at any venue that served food and drink and allowed dancing. On top of that, the draft took away a lot of the musicians from these clubs. So there you go, you have the hop and swing clubs all taken away from a war that attacked the fun that they were having outside of the sadness. And this actually contributed with a lot of racism. The racism is what kind of drove people to shut down the swing clubs. They didn't want to see integrated bands. People of color during the time were musicians that were paid less than their European American counterparts. African Americans had to contend with the most oppressive manifestations of racial prejudice and segregation. Even the black jazz stars featured with named white bands were subjected to the most demeaning indignities. In general, most African American jazz musicians became increasingly disenchanted with swing music the more they watched their innovations capitalized on by European Americans. They wanted to create their own music, a music that was too difficult, too virtuistic. And they did. But we'll get that into our rest of our 4 workshops this month. There was also a recording ban during this time. In 1942, the main issue at stake in the strike was the payment of royalties on recorded performances. And because a settlement could not be reached, James Petrillo, president of the AFM, instituted a total ban on AFM members participating in any recording session for commercial sale. So actually, that song by Billie Holiday, Strange Fruit, that was recorded after the ban. A lot of her songs were recorded back to back to back because she couldn't record them. That is the demise of swing. You have